Well, George Bush was president during a critical pivot point in American history, maybe more than one pivot point. The breakup of the Soviet Union, the attempt by Iraq, by Saddam, to eliminate Kuwait as a country, the modern emergence of China. All of his experience, all of his credentialing came together to be put to good use at those critical moments. And unfortunately, so much of the success of the Bush presidency is all the bad things that didn't happen when they could have. The stakes were high, and the books have been written about everything that could have happened, but the measured, experienced, sure-footed, confident Bush saw us through those critical times, and I think history will serve him well as a result.
And that he didn't overly celebrate the demise of
Never.
the Soviet Union, that he was okay with the reunification of Germany, which at the time there was a lot of concern about.
Yeah, no spiking the ball ever with George Bush. No, he was very sensitive that we don't want to humiliate anybody here when they're going through a stressful time. And that was true in nation states, the Soviet Union. It was also true in his personal life. He always believed, like in politics, you always leave a man a way out, and you always keep the hand of friendship extended. Bush had no permanent enemies, didn't believe in it. He had competitors, he had scuff-ups, he had people who disagreed with him. If you didn't reach out to him, he would always reach out to you. There were no permanent enemies with George Bush.
A lot's been said this week about his era of civility in politics, so to speak. His son, Jeb Bush, and James Baker wrote this week that that era is not necessarily gone. What do you think?
I think it's a timeless quality, and I think a lot of would-be politicians and up-and-comers could learn a lot from the example of George Bush. For one thing, you know, Bush didn't have a traditional political base. He had never been elected statewide. He wasn't a governor. His base came from the accumulation of one-on-one personal interactions where people were convinced of the merits of his character. So when it came time for him to run, he had thousands of believers and people committed to him, not again because he had a more traditional political career, but because they've been exposed to him as such a decent human being. And that was his base.
You also highlighted, look, that the campaigns were often nasty, and that was a struggle of his, which was, here's a gentleman, a guy of such grace, as you eloquently described, who still had to get down there and be involved with some of what we would now consider the modern nastiness of these presidential campaigns.
Yeah, again, maybe something we can all learn, and it's an excellent time to sort of pause and reflect. Bush came into the presidency just at the dawn of what we now call the permanent campaign, where everybody's campaigning every day, all the time. There's winners and losers every day. Bush thought campaign politics was a seasonal sport. A few months before the election, you get your campaign team and you do campaign things. After that, you govern. And good government is the best politics. You set the campaign politics aside during the time of governance. And that's not altogether a bad thing. Maybe we can learn from that. Maybe that time has passed. It would take a lot of discipline on both parties' part. But again, he thought it was seasonal. He thought campaign politics could be dirty. And he didn't particularly care for it, and he wasn't great at it as a result.
You worked for Lee Atwater
right.
at times. Did the president ever later, post-presidency, express regret for the hardball tactics that it takes to win, to be in a position to later govern?
Well, not regret. I think that he would sigh, and he knew that some of it was ugly. He knew that some of it was not particularly tasteful, and I think he anguished about it. I think some of the worst aspects of his campaign, he probably tried to block them from his memory, didn't want to talk about them, didn't want to relive them, didn't write about them. But the knife fights took place, but when they were over, they were over.
Some have said this week that he never really wrote a proper memoir.
No.
And does that speak to his humility or something else?
It does. How could his bias against boastfulness, his reticence to take the spotlight and to shout about himself, I think it is. I think it's reflective in that he would have thought it presumptuous to write a flattering book about himself.
And I liked how both he and Barbara had apparently said, you know, we want to leave the judgment to history. A lot of people are afraid of what that judgment might look like, not them.
But think of the confidence and the discipline that it takes to have that attitude, and how rare it is today when so many political leaders think that it's standard operating procedure to be boastful, to take credit,
to craft your legacy in the moment,
to try to shape your legacy in the most flattering way possible rather than just let it happen.
As we're watching some of the arrivals here at the National Cathedral, Ed, to your point about the message about his life and the way he carried himself, how do you think Washington absorbs that message today? How long-lasting is that?
Well, what is the half-life of this reflection that we're having now about the character of George Bush and the character traits that we find desirable? Probably not very long, but I think it will linger. It may linger in some younger politicians, and it may teach some older ones some lessons that, even if they're selfishly driven, that, gee, acting in a civil way will get me some of the applause that I seek otherwise. I read someplace, I thought it was well said, that even President Trump was being abnormally normal throughout these proceedings. So,
well, all I
good
can
for him.
say